Every single overclock in Deep Rock Galactic has its place. This week we're rounding off Driller's kit by testing every single one for the Corrosive Sludge Pump and the Colette Wave Cooker. Let's start with the new one, Combustive Goo Mix. This new overclock makes enemies that are affected by both burn and the corrosive dot explode violently, damaging everything nearby and clearing the burn effect. While this doesn't apply to enemies who are standing in puddles, it does apply to the puddles themselves, destroying the puddles in the process. It's a pretty awkward overclock, not because of the weapon switching required to use it on your own, but because far and away the best way to use it against large packs of grunts is to ignite puddles, which then destroys them, and that causes a chain reaction that detonates and destroys all other nearby puddles. It's a constant game of balancing how much value you'll get out of your defensive line if you let it persist versus blowing it all at once. It's certainly effective at getting the enemies dead now rather than a few seconds though, and the only real penalty it has is a charge shot ammo cost penalty, so it's not like it's hurting the gun much unless you love to spam charge shots everywhere. The main flaw with this overclock is the near complete lack of options for burning enemies yourself. Remember, you can't equip the flamethrower and the sludge pump at the same time, leaving your only source of heat as Burning Nightmare EPC. Now, if you're a fan of Burning Nightmare builds, then it's absolutely usable, and it can even be decently effective at bursting down Praetorians if you can get them in the middle of a lot of puddles. But that's in a vacuum. In a normal lobby with other sources of heat, it's likely that teammates will accidentally detonate your defensive line, or that you might ruin a Volatile Bullets synergy build by painting the enemy with the corrosive dot. All said, it's not a bad overclock if you want to fully shift the gun to burst horde clearing, but despite not penalizing the gun's utility at all, you should consider the utility reduced anyway since you're sacrificing it for that burst. Goo Bomber Special makes your charged shot drop fragments in a line as it flies instead of in an explosion where it lands. It also significantly increases puddle lifetime, fragment count, and damage. The only downside this overclock has is the different way the charge shot works now. It's not super impactful, but it does require you to approach charge shots in a different way. The charge shot now has a much longer effective range and can lay down puddles across an entire cavern, but the gradual release combined with the fact that any fragments left when the shot lands are wasted makes it significantly less effective at close range. The straight line of puddles might not be quite as useful as defense, but the increased lifetime means they'll stick around for quite a while, 24 seconds with the duration upgrade and 16 without. That means you can pretty easily drop a line over an incoming crowd, then reposition to use the line as a defensive one for the next wave or even two. It's also great if you enjoy kiting a little, as that tends to line enemies up behind you. Overall, the overclock significantly enhances the proactive and long-range elements of the sludge pump, while discarding the quick and simple close-range action, although the duration buff affects the normal shots too, so you can create your own long-lasting defensive line of puddles in whatever shape you want. I should also mention that there used to be a strategy where you aim the shot directly upwards and cause all the fragments to hit the same enemy, dealing massive damage. I thought I remembered reading something about being patched out, but I wasn't sure, so I gave it a try. My results were inconclusive, but it didn't seem to be pretty effective or anything. Volatile Impact Mixture doubles your normal and charge shot damage, but halves the duration of the corrosion debuff and reduces puddle lifetime by about 30%. This is another of those driller overclocks that attempts to turn his primary into the flamethrower, at least in roll. Each shot packs a punch, but without some form of damage upgrade, a single shot doesn't seem to reliably kill grunts. If you do have that damage upgrade, it's a fair bit snappier than the base sludge pump, but it's still quite sluggish when compared to driller's other primary DPS options, especially as far as grunts are concerned. It's decent at whittling down tougher targets, or at least as decent as you can expect. We are talking about Driller here. And the damage is nothing to sneeze at. You lose a fair amount of the utility though, although the puddles are still perfectly usable, they just don't last quite as long. You are losing quite a bit of the total damage though, assuming best case scenario, 2 seconds of the corrosion effect is worth about 71 damage, if you wait it out, and you're trading that for only 24 damage up front. Only the charge shot breaks even, and only on the primary projectile. It's not bad, since enemies aren't likely to last 4 full seconds in most cases, especially with teammates also contributing damage, but in terms of raw total damage against tough targets, your potential is actually decreased, although all that damage happens faster, which is still a solid benefit. In terms of advantages over the other primaries, this one is decently ammo efficient and doesn't fall off quite as hard against the smaller groups. It also seems to be pretty effective against core spawn, for whatever that's worth. Sludge Blast turns your charge shot into a shotgun-like spread, but reduces your ammo by 40 along with a significant reload speed penalty. The shotgun now makes every projectile in the blast do half the damage of the standard charge shot, meaning charge shot damage upgrades will boost their damage. This is a massive damage boost for charge shots that allows you to pump out crazy DPS against tougher enemies, even enabling you to quickly handle bosses. It's extremely ammo hungry though, much like other burst damage options in the game, and the charge shot no longer has anything resembling crowd control due to the tight spread and lack of pierce. That said, the fact that all of your damage ignores armor makes suppressors a non-issue and dreadnoughts mere inconveniences. You're going to want to ration this quite a bit since you'll run dry very fast if you don't, but it's a potent burst option for a class that normally lacks that sort of thing. Now moving on to the cleans. Hydrogen Ion Additive is a clean that boosts the damage and slowdown of the debuff you apply on a direct hit. It's a nice little bump that helps keep enemies off you and gets them dead quicker. It's not too massive of a boost and it doesn't affect the puddles at all, but if you're more of a direct hit kind of sludge pump user, this is a nice one if you don't want to change things up too much. Antigravity Mixture makes your projectiles fly faster and fall slower. A lot slower. If the arc was the one thing keeping you from enjoying the sludge pump, then you should definitely try this overclock. It doesn't increase the weapon's potential, but it does massively extend its effective range. The effectively flat arc makes the weapon significantly easier to use, even at mid-range and close range too, and it's way easier to hit things like Mactera, especially with the increased projectile velocity. Disperser Compound increases the number and damage of your charge shot fragments while reducing the damage of the main charge shot. This is a good one for those who prefer to use charge shots to cover crowds rather than score some good damage on a single target. The extra fragments mean more puddle coverage, although there will be significant overlap. It can make a difference in uneven terrain or when using a charge shot on a wall. The downside is negligible since the main charge shot doesn't really deal all that much damage anyway, and you're losing as much damage as you gain. It doesn't affect normal shots at all either, so this is generally a good overclock to apply if you aren't sure what you want to do with the gun but also don't like either of the cleans. Now on to the Wave Cooker. For this one I had an extra rule. The Wave Cooker actually deals 50% radiation damage, and enemies in the radioactive exclusion zone have anywhere from a 50 to 100% radiation resist, so I avoided that biome for the duration of this testing. Now let's start off with Diffusion Ray. This gives the beam the ability to pierce while also inflicting an additional slow on target's hit. The price is a lower damage output. This is an odd overclock. While it seems spec'd for utility, the Pierce actually does make it very effective at dealing with crowds of enemies, especially when paired with Boiler Ray, as the Pierce will allow you to hit a potentially weaker enemy that's being obscured by others and detonate it in the middle of the pack. The slowdown is still helpful though, and combined with the additional slowdown upgrade, enemies can barely move at all. It's nice for keeping crowds in a puddle of sludge or sticky flames, or potentially just keeping them off you altogether while waiting for, say, Born Ready to reload your primary. The ammo efficiency leaves much to be desired, though that's more a problem with the weapon itself than anything related to this overclock. The single target DPS is also laughable, so don't even bother. Even using it on barnacles dries it out extremely quickly. In short, this is a nice little utility that can help increase the effectiveness of basically anything other than direct damage on a single target. Just ration it carefully. This isn't a tier list, and I'm not trying to rank these overclocks in terms of power, but Super Focused Lens isn't as good as it looks. It increases the damage you deal at quote-unquote close range, which while sounding good on paper, isn't really once you start considering its stats. According to the wiki, it's a 50% damage boost, which sounds pretty good for a clean, but it's only within 4 meters. For reference, 4 meters is roughly double pickaxe range. You have to get up to near point blank just to utilize the damage boost, which means anything you use it on is liable to get a hit back on you, which is not ideal. It's very risky to use, especially without the slow upgrade to slow enemies from hitting you, but it can be very useful if you're backed into a corner and your primary isn't spec'd for punching through that. It is a clean though, so at the very least it's not hurting you any. Gamma Contamination gives your shots a chance to apply an AoE radiation debuff in exchange for less ammo and less damage and a smaller shot width. The radiation damages both the target and all nearby enemies in an appreciable range, and it deals a good amount of damage too. It's fantastic for firing into small crowds to get the most out of the piercing AoE and whittle down a bunch of enemies at once. That said, once again, Driller isn't really short on ways to do that, and the lower ammo and damage means you're really relying on the radiation to proc for a lot of the weapon's potency. It also has the minor disadvantage of sometimes losing the niche of taking care of exploders without blowing them up, since if the radiation dot kills, they won't pop like they normally do. It's a good overclock if you want to lean even further into crowd clearing. Liquid Cooling System is a nice clean that buffs every heat-related aspect of the gun. Shorter overheat, less heat generation, faster cooling. It's a nice little usability boost that lets you fire longer in bursts with lower downtime and get punished less for overheating. It doesn't boost the power of the gun any, but it's a nice ease-of-use overclock. Mega Power Supply boosts your ammo and fire rate in exchange for the gun shedding heat slower and taking longer to recover from an overheat. This is a good overclock for anyone who wants to focus on the direct damage to the gun and improve its ammo efficiency in the process. It requires a more reserved usage as overheating is very easy to do, but if you can ration it properly it will last a long time and deal good damage throughout. The overheating isn't that bad, but be prepared for it. Overall, this is a pretty good overclock if you don't want any frills, making the weapon stronger in the most basic and important of ways without weakening too much else about it. And finally, we have Blistering Necrosis. I'll be honest, I don't fully understand how this one works. It's actually quite complicated given the premise, but I'll do my best to read off the wiki stats where necessary. This overclock increases your heat generation and reduces your cooling rate, but makes your shots sometimes create blisters on hit enemies. These blisters act as weak points, transfer all damage to whatever they're attached to, and have a built-in 1.5 times weak point modifier, unless the blister is attached to a weak point with a higher value, in which case I assume it just uses that higher value. The blisters also pop when damaged enough, dealing even more damage in an insignificant AoE. This is a pretty nice overclock for team play since you can create weak points for your teammates to hit and allow them to hit things through armor and with higher damage overall. The trick is getting value out of it in a vacuum. I know that the wave cooker itself can hit the blisters, and I'd assume pretty much any projectile also can, but whether any or all of your primary weapons can affect the blisters is not something I'm confident in. It seems like they can, but I can't prove it one way or another. Maybe someone with more experience can come confirm or deny. Regardless, it's nice for softening up tough enemies and makes the wave cooker kill light crowds a lot faster. It's no marked for death, but it's the same concept and it's pretty good, especially given the minor downsides. And that's all the overclocks for the Sludge Pump and Wave Cooker. These two weapons are quite unusual compared to the rest of Driller's equipment, but they're fun to use once you get the hang of them.